Okay, we're ready? Okay, call the meeting to order at 7:08, and again, send my apologies for being on the wrong link there. At least I wasn't by myself. When you're by yourself, you kind of so. At least when there's somebody else, you're like you're not on a lifeboat there. So, is there any public comments that were posted ahead of time, Ellie?
None to the Google Sheet, and we've got the link up now, so we'll keep that open for the first 15 minutes of the meeting.
Okay. Allison, you had a question?
I had a public comment to bring up when we
get to okay. I'm sorry. Okay. Allison, go ahead.
Okay. This was on behalf of, I'm sorry if there's an annoying alarm in my background, so if that goes off during this, just ignore it. We have a lot of new students coming in right now who are English language learners from outside of the country. Some are Afghan refugees, some are, in other situations where they're coming into our schools in the middle of the year. A lot of these students, more than usual, do not have internet access at home. So even though they're being given Chromebooks to use at home, they have no ability to access the Chromebook or do any work because they don't have internet. And so the question that was brought to me for public comment was just whether the district was considering any sort of provision of hotspots like we did, sorry about the alarm, provision of hotspots like we did during COVID, or whether there were any resources available specifically for primarily low-income refugee students, but new students coming in who have been given a Chromebook, but basically it's a paperweight because they have no internet access at home. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, and I guess Lucas will update, and though we don't comment on public comments, you kind of straddle both fences there, Alice.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just doing the best I can so that, like, honestly, we have kids from Afghanistan right now who are like, yeah, I live in the US and I'm trying to go to school and I don't have internet. I'm just doing my best.
Okay. Has everybody had a chance to look at the minutes from the 10th?
I'm still partway through them. I didn't realize they were only going to be on the agenda and not posted on the website before the meeting. I apologize, but I would like to request just a few more minutes.
Yeah, I put them in the chat, so you can. Why don't we agree to put it on hold until people have had a chance during the meeting, and then we can come back to that. Okay. Can we? Any objections to that? I should ask officially. No objections. I guess I should put my hand down. That looks like an objection. Okay. Just a continuation of our conversation on the learning management systems, and I wanted to make sure that everybody on the TAC understands that no matter at this current state, it's not like we have recommended a learning management system. There's no current budget for a learning management system adoption. It's only a conversation of it's like a pre in the sense we are looking at it and we're soliciting ideas and thoughts about it from the members of the community. But it's very important that everybody, that all of us understand. And when we talk with people, we're very clear that we haven't even made a decision, nor has the board, nor has the district made any decision to adopt a learning management. So I wanted to make that clear to everybody, because I actually had a teacher ask me when we were getting it, and I was like, "What?" And she said, "Well, my understanding was TAC was reviewing them, and I said, no, we're not adopting. We're really trying to see if there is a need for it, and does it fill in an area that we currently don't have, or have access to through Infinite Campus. So I just want to be clear on that as we move forward in this conversation. Is that clear, Lucas? Is everybody clear on that? Is there any questions regarding that?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Tom. One of the things, I think I mentioned this previously as well, but obviously right now we do have two LMS systems that we're currently supporting. One is Google Classroom and the other is the LMS through Infinite Campus. And one of the things that I think would be useful as we are now in the second half of the year would be to actually give TAC an opportunity again to see Google Classroom. And I think particularly some of our community members who maybe haven't seen the full capabilities of Google Classroom LMS. Also, Infinite Campus's LMS functionality, which is built into the student information system. And then Don also made a very good point, which is Seesaw, which is the elementary LMS. So one of the things that I'm going to recommend for some of our upcoming meetings is that we have some short demos of those so that the community could have the opportunity to see them. I think anytime we look at a new solution or consider a new solution, looking at what we currently have does make a lot of sense. Google Classroom, fortunately, it's one of those products where there's no cost to it as a school district. Obviously, we do have the enterprise solution, which gives us some additional functionality as part of the Google Workspace for Education suite. And then, obviously, we do have the Infinite Campus solution as well, which there are more teachers using that. So I think that's the direction, at least for some of these upcoming meetings, that I think we should look at.
Okay, good. And I can speak to my side on this, and I want to be. Don has been very helpful for us, but as we've gone farther and farther along this path, teachers are starting to figure out things and things like that. So it's been, I think some of it is just shaking out. Not to say there aren't issues and problems, and we may need an LMS, but I think, as I was telling Bart when we were at our first meeting earlier, and Allison has been there long enough, and so has Dawn. Before School Loop, and maybe parents don't realize it, before School Loop, there was no learning management system in Fremont Unified. Some people used, micrograde, some used Easy Grade Pro, and one person used an Excel spreadsheet that I know of and continue to use it for years. But so everybody, and some people were just pencil and papering it, kind of thing. So then when we adopted School Loop, that was a major step forward. And for the first year or so, there were some major, quote, issues that teachers had, and then either figured it out or, School Loop, did some adjustments and things like that. So I think it's important to realize that, that it's not the opportunity for adopting a system may be resolved in some of the ways. Even now, we're learning that Infinite Campus can do. That's not to say I'm against or for any learning management system, but I can speak at Centerville. People are starting to get a better handle on it, and I don't know, Allison, what your experience at Irvington has been.
People are really unhappy with it, but maybe it'll come later.
Yeah, no, it's okay. That's fine. Okay.
But I think the hard part, Tom, also is that with School Loop, it wasn't required that the staff used it, correct?
Yeah, and you can't, because of the way the state law is, people aren't required to use Infinite Campus for their grading. It makes it a lot easier, but there are some teachers that don't use Infinite Campus for their grading. They use Google Classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's some teachers that don't use any, and because the way they structure their class. So it's not required. Infinite Campus. The only thing you're required to do, quote, by state law, and I don't know the exact wording, but essentially is you need to have a way of grading that you're able to explain clearly to the students and parents, and you need to post your grades. And you need to then, communicate, via email or, phone, or however it is. But there's no requirement by the state or anybody to use any one particular grade program. Arun?
Yes, one of the comments I have is I guess if you look at any school district around us, they are using an LMS, whether it's Canvas, Schoology, whatever, right? So I think we would be in sync if we were to use something comparable. The second point I have is whatever, if we do pick an LMS and if it's Google Classroom or regardless what it is, one of the comments I received is let's try to increase the adoption of it because it doesn't really help if you have an LMS that only 50% of the teachers use. Infinite Campus is the main feedback has been it's very silent, and the amount of information it provides is not adequate for most. Those are my comments.
Allison?
Yeah, just from a teacher perspective, in terms of consistency, I completely agree with Arun. But the part that you guys might not see is that FUSD has a long history, and this is before a lot of you guys were here, but a long history of introducing a new, not really an LMS. We've had various systems for websites and grading that were introduced. For example, SchoolWires is a great example of that in like November. So a parent group showed up and did a training for us in like November on this new grading system that we were going to have to switch to. And for teachers, when that happens repeatedly, it becomes, I've already set up my gradebook in August on something else. And then you want me to learn this new thing in November and manually switch all the data over to the new thing. And then you're going to want me to do that next year again. And so when you had people like using Gradebook Plus for multiple years in a row, it sounds like, oh, the teachers are just afraid to embrace new technology. What it is that they want consistency. They don't want the rug yanked out from them in November to have to adopt a new system. They don't really want training in August, hypothetically in a room listening to somebody demo a new system when they don't even have students on their roster that they could enter, that they could play with, right? So it's the rollout of these things, if you actually want people to adopt them, it needs to stay the same for more than 1 year. It needs to be rolled out at a time that makes sense for teachers, which needs to be before the school year starts.
Yeah, and I will say that School Loop had an adoption of about 92, 93%. But I think one of the things that worked well for School Loop is we had a group of beta testers tested it, and there was about 15 of us, and that really was beneficial, I think, because not only the teachers who were using it, the beta test, but the office then was able to understand how things worked. Mel was really instrumental. He was a part of that. So it really, then by the time then when it got released out the next year to the staff, a lot of the, not only was there were people out in the sites who were, experienced in it, had used it. There were people in the district office who'd already been, in there. So I don't know how that model works. I think Allison raised a very good point. Introducing something September 1 is difficult. Teachers are already trying to teach their classes, and I think it's important to remember for teachers, technology is not the end. It's just a hammer. And I think that's we don't, if you're a carpenter, you're building a house, you don't want to spend every day learning how to use a new hammer. You have a hammer, and then you're done. And now that hammer just works. And teachers, technology is not nearly how to use a hammer, but it takes a lot of time to learn a new technology. And me coming from the corporate world, we don't devote this really ages me here. So I used WordPerfect and Lotus when they first came out in the very beginning of time. But I literally went to an entire week, 40-hour training for WordPerfect and another one for Lotus. And then when we flipped to Word, same training I went. And then I was familiar with it. And then we know there's a learning curve. But that kind of training we know may or may not be feasible in the educational system. but just to understand that we don't get that training. An hour and a half training on a software program is not a realistic expectation of expertise. If that makes sense. Lucas?
Yeah, I agree with you, Tom, on that. Part of the reason I think there's some value in seeing some of these solutions is, I heard your comment, Arun, that it's not necessarily providing a lot of useful information, the Infinite Campus solution. And I think, maybe we'll discover that I'll see what you're talking about. But I do want people to see that what the system is fully capable of, because in some cases it might simply be that it's not being fully utilized by a particular teacher, and that's the reason for it. It isn't necessarily a limitation of the system. But after seeing it, getting some feedback I think will be useful. I know from my experience with my son's school, he's out of high school, but the type of information that Infinite Campus and Google Classroom are providing were very comparable to what my son received. That's not to say it's exactly the same, but the type of information was very similar. So hopefully by this group seeing those solutions, it will answer some of your questions. And maybe that's what we'll discover, is it's just a matter of certain features not being used by certain staff.
Manjeet?
Yes, I was trying to understand. We got these several tools now: iParent, Infinity Compass, Schoolwires, and like Thomas, you said, even Excel sheets, which teachers are using, and student data is being added into this. Is there someone who is watching security for this? I mean, if it's an Excel sheet, you don't know where the Excel sheet is sitting. I mean, it sounds like something we should be concerned about. And is someone watching the security side of these things? We are dealing with student data, aren't we?
Manjeet, I apologize. I was unclear. I don't know anybody currently using Excel for that. So that would, that most of the people I know are either using Google Classroom or Infinite Campus, and that's within Schoolwires that Allison referring to. That was only a previous software program that we used for websites. So that was not a student information.
Totally agreed. The point I'm trying to make is, unless we have a standard tool which is approved by the district, it would be hard to secure the student data, and we might be open to a lot of unknown unknowns here. So one comment you made, Thomas, was that we cannot mandate a teacher from using a specific tool. There is a California law. Is that something which gives us some kind of a flexibility there, or what does that mean?
I don't in any way, shape, or form propose to be a lawyer. It's only my understanding that the law requires that a teacher provide a system of grading that's clear to the student and the parent, and that they require that they post those grades for the report card, and that they right now we're in what we call the progress report, a notice of failure. That's the only thing the state requires. So that's the system that currently the state says.
Understood. So the point is, there should be some kind of a standardized system we can and should not have, right? Like an open playbook here. That's all comment I want to make.
Allison?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify part of that, I think, is that if you imagined writing a state policy, how do you standardize that? So if you try to say, oh, everyone should use Canvas, you can't, right? I mean, the State Department of Education can't endorse one particular learning management system. And then if you're like, okay, everyone in a district should use a standardized management system, what about the districts that don't have funding to provide such a thing to every school? So what it becomes is what Tom said, which is that everyone needs to keep grades and post grades in a place that's visible to the public. It's very difficult to write
The school district
policy for the whole state that mandates one system.
Yeah. No, I didn't mean the state would mandate a system. I meant that state would say you need a system, And which system is mandated is upon Fremont Unified District to decide. So once we have a system in Fremont District, that would be mandated across Fremont schools. Just like any other organization, the company tells you what tool and software to use.
I'm just saying that the state doesn't give us any money to adopt a system. So if the system is pencil and paper and you post it on the wall, that's something that costs nothing, and the state can mandate that. The state cannot tell us that we have to spend thousands of dollars on a system they're not going to provide funding for.
We can choose our own system.
I think what he's saying is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is the idea that Fremont should say this is what everyone is using, and we can't do that either. So even though we have Infinite Campus, the district can require that teachers enter grades for report card purposes into Infinite Campus, but the district cannot require teachers to use Infinite Campus as their gradebook of choice. And then that's where we get into what I think you're trying to get to, Manjeet, is if a teacher's using Easy Grade Pro, are they sharing that data with parents, and how are they doing it securely?
Yeah, I know. I think that was. I think that's probably something that we should spend some time on, because if this state does not mandate anything, and it's a bit of a free for all in terms of whatever tool anyone chooses to use, I think it's too broad, and I think we should have a perspective for how we can create some checks and balances.
Can I step in here? I think we've kind of left the conversation here. I'm happy to address the issue of security on this area, but I think that would be an agendized. I think, can we bring it back? Is there any other questions on the learning? Because and if I apologize, I've let it go far beyond the brief update on learning man. I apologize. Is there any questions specific to learning management system before we move on to new business? Nope. Okay. Reaffirmation of remote meetings, a revote on the same statement, just the ability to continue going. Could I get a motion to continue doing that? Nope, I have a Margaret.
Go ahead.
And Allison seconds.
Cool.
Any opposition? Nope, it passes unanimously. Thank you.
Tom, actually, it'd be to have a vote by roll. If everybody can type a Y or an N.
Okay, so if you could go ahead and type a yes
in chat,
that would be great. There we go. Appreciate that. Okay. One of the concerns at
I have a question for you.
Go ahead, Robert.
So I'm on another committee, and I understand that the board is looking at trying to make this a built-in process, so we don't have to do this every month. Is that true?
I can answer that. Yes, they should be voting on it on Wednesday, and then we won't have to reaffirm that part or have a special meeting. So it's primarily just reduces the special meeting potential if over 30 days we have to go back in.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Expiring Chromebooks. So I'll give you a little bit of context for those that don't know, and I will expose my Chrome bias, my Google biases here. Originally, when Chrome came out, there's like, oh, you'll never have to buy another piece of hardware again because the new browsers, it'll always work on your Chromebook. Well, turns out that is not necessarily the case. And in our case, particularly, we do testing on the Chromebooks. So we're running up a hardware issue there. So Lucas, I don't know if you could update us on that.
Yeah, I can provide you some information and some data, which, it's going to be a little bit concerning. So one of the things that some of you may not be aware of is that traditionally the district is not responsible for purchasing Chromebooks. The sites have traditionally been responsible for purchasing their devices. However, there have been times where there's been significant funds allocated from the district. And I think the first round was LCAP funds. I don't remember, this was before I was here, but it was the Chromebooks, which are currently expiring this year. And it was a significant number. So this year, throughout the year, we will have a total of 10,000 Chromebooks, which will cease to receive updates. Now, that doesn't mean that those devices stop working, but it does mean that the longer they're in circulation, there will be certain things that will stop working, and there's some level of risk with them. That said, of course, we do have pretty good security on our network and our firewall. So those are some safety measures that give them a little bit of extra life. For next year, we're anticipating another 8,000 Chromebooks, and this is based upon data from our Google Admin Console that will go end of life. Not all at once, but throughout the year. And so I believe right now we have just over 30,000 Chromebooks that are part of our fleet, and the schools are purchasing Chromebooks like crazy right now. And I haven't been here long enough to know on an average year how many Chromebooks the schools actually purchase, but we do know that it's not going to be over a period of 2 years, 18,000 Chromebooks to cover the ones that we're currently losing. Now, we probably don't need all 18,000 to do our state assessments and iReady assessments and the different things that we're looking at doing, but we do know that if we lost 18,000 Chromebooks and didn't replace some of them, that we're going to be in a difficult situation when it comes to state testing. I don't see us necessarily having an issue this year. However, I have definitely brought this to the attention of Cabinet so that we can look at this. And I know that there's a number of schools out there that are really prioritizing their discretionary funds. And for those who are not aware of it, that's traditionally where a lot of the Chromebook or other technology purchases at school sites come from. Some sites, depending upon their student population, have additional funding above and beyond typically what some schools have. And so they have a little bit different buckets of money to pick from to purchase those devices. But we do have a breakdown in the IT department, school by school, and so we know, which schools are most hard hit. I will mention again that we do have some emergency connectivity funding dollars that are going to be used to purchase devices, but those devices again are intended to be used by students at home that don't have a device. We're pretty close, I think, to being ordering that, and then of course we got to get those devices. So while we are going to get 6,000 Chromebooks as part of that program, those are not devices that will be necessarily committed to being on campus, and we certainly can't put them in Chromebook carts and use them in a fashion that will allow us to say, hey, we need 25 Chromebooks so we can do the state test. You might only have 2 or 3 kids in that entire class that have those devices assigned to them, and so that doesn't necessarily solve the issue. But there's no question the way that Chromebooks and other technology is purchased in the district does create a challenge for ensuring that we have the number of devices. And I think I would say we're probably at the maximum that we will probably ever hit unless we get a dedicated funding source for technology. And I will share that, that is something that has been discussed at the state, but I think the cost associated with it in terms of tax dollars is probably very restrictive. For those who are a little bit more involved in the funding sources and understanding that for school districts, the model that I believe would work best, and for those who have the ear of their politicians, I would promote something along the lines that IT departments would get a 3%, essentially 3% of what the district's budget is, and that would be committed. And that's similar to like maintenance and operations. They get a dedicated 3% from the state to maintain and support facilities. And maybe it wouldn't need to be 3%, but definitely a committed percentage so that schools would have a reliable funding source for technology rather than, getting funds from so many different places or trying to get a federal, E-rate discount here and state discount here, or, that kind of thing. So that's the big picture of where things stand. And it is a difficult thing. And I did talk with the administration last year because we knew this was coming. And we provided this data, but there's no easy answers for this. And we can open up for questions.
Lucas, you talked about how eventually each unit has an end of service life where they're not going to receive software updates, but that local security measures allow them to still be basically functional beyond being just paperweights for a certain amount of time. You also have kind of minimum OS requirements that the state has for the units to be able to do things like state testing. Is there any advocacy that's being done at higher levels to talk about why or if updates need to be done that frequently to the testing system to hopefully make units last a little bit longer in terms of use?
That's a good question, Ellie. I have not been doing that, but I do believe our assessment director has definitely been part of meetings where they've talked about that. Because you're absolutely right. That would be one way to help schools out if they were to not require certain versions of the Chrome OS. I will actually make a note. I'll talk with Steve Musto, who he's just moved positions, but he's still got his hand in the assessment department.
If we could take just a quick moment to introduce, well, Vivek was last year, but we have a new board member on our joining us. Diane, welcome.
Thank you very much. I apologize for being late. Both Trustee Prasad and I just got out of a joint meeting with the city. So I think we both logged off and logged right back into this meeting. So it's great to join you, and I'm happy to be on this committee.
Welcome. We're, just so you know, we're give you a quick where we're on the conversation. We're talking about the Chromebooks that are going out of date and the implications. And I think probably the biggest concern is the possibility that the Chromebooks would not work in our testing environment. I think, Lucas, the Chromebooks will probably last for a long time. They just won't get updates. But in terms of going onto websites, I think they'll continue. The only real crisis would be as if they were there. So next up, Allison.
Yeah, sorry, I had to find my unmute. Two things. One is that I just wondered where we were in terms of so my site had some frustration a couple of years back when we wanted to purchase some new Chrome carts, and there were newer Chromebooks available, and we were not allowed to purchase them because they were not listed on the district website as the approved piece of technology we were allowed to purchase. So we ended up having to purchase older Chromebooks, even though we knew that they would end of life quicker. I had to purchase some for myself, and I ended up getting special dispensation from Lucas's predecessor to do that. But it took me a very long time to get that authorization. So just sort of wondering whether either the list of approved devices on the district website could be updated more frequently, or there could be some sort of thing on there that says, these are our approved devices, or you can get whatever the new version is of the same thing without running into purchasing, kicking back your purchase, because that's what happened. And my school purchased 8 or 10 Chrome carts that we knew were outdated because we were told that was all we could purchase. And so now we're dealing with a huge amount of machines that are end of life, even though we knew when we purchased them that we had better options, and that's frustrating. And then secondly, there are some solutions which are not ideal, obviously, things like Cloud Ready from Neverware that allow you to turn older existing PC laptops into essentially Chromebooks by deploying essentially an open source version of what a Chromebook is to these laptops. And so I'm not explaining that well, but are there, we're sort of scrambling to figure out how to get the machines that we need. And so just sort of wondering if there's any way that we can be creative about getting that, given that, as Lucas pointed out, we don't have the money to replace all of the machines that we need. Those are my two things.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. I can comment. The one of the things that I will tell you is I've worked with Mary Lassica, who is our IT administrator, and particularly with our standards, I've said we need to be a little bit more flexible with that. So what I think really what the pattern has been now is that the schools reach out to Mary. Mary assists in putting together a quote for them, even if they're only ordering, say, 20 Chromebooks. And what I've said to Mary is we really want to be very mindful to ensure that whatever our Chromebook standard is, that we're going to get the maximum number of years out of it, which if it's out, and I know I've heard you talk about this before, which is, it is kind of disappointing. You get a Chromebook and then it turns out, whatever, maybe it's only 4 years where it gets updates, or 3 years. And that is really not ideal. So even, and I'll share this, even with our Windows laptops, when we're putting Windows 10 on now, we're putting the Windows 10 Education Edition on, because that version of Windows 10 is designed to get updates longer. So I'm very mindful of that. My understanding is our current version of very affordable Chromebook that we're purchasing should get the maximum number of years of updates. And then also just to address, the different non-standard options that are out there. I have talked to other districts who are doing that, and I would say some very successfully. There is some overhead though for the IT department, and there is cost associated with implementing those solutions. I don't think it's terribly expensive, but there is, for part of it is it's really that overhead on my department, which, staffing is what it is. I talk with people and I say, our systems team has 2 people that support our entire system, and that is really not common. And so to do a non-standard solution that is open source, that doesn't have necessarily great support, that would put an extra burden on them to be managing another system when they already really can't keep up with any new projects, to be frank. But you're absolutely correct, Allison. There are schools out there who are doing that really well. There's no question that those third-party solutions.
Robert?
I just want to understand this issue a little bit better, since I don't follow Chromebooks that much. When you say that the license expiring, is this a Chromebook education license that's needed to remotely manage the device, or is there something else? Because that's all I see on Google.
Yeah, so Robert, it's a good question. So to be clear, the licenses are not actually expiring. Chromebook licenses are actually never expire, but they are tied to the device. And so what we're talking about really, this is the manufacturers who have negotiated with Google. And so when they develop their hardware, they have a contract, and they say, for this device, we will agree that the hardware will continue to get updates, and we will provide support for it through a certain number of years. And after that point, then the hardware vendor says, we're no longer going to allow our devices to receive updates. So that's really what it comes down to. It's Google will allow us to continue using these devices as long as we want with the licenses. They're like now $38 a piece. So if we have a Chromebook that we buy, we pay $38 for it, and say for 5 years we get updates. After that 5 years, that Chromebook keeps working, and no question about that. But it's not getting security updates. It's not getting the Chrome OS updates to support new applications and new browser features.
Okay. Any other questions on the Chromebooks? Okay.
I have one question.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Vivek. Sorry.
So Lucas, you mentioned that this particular hardware provider. So hardware providers have their limitations. They are putting the limitation. So are there different standards that different hardware providers have in terms of how long they will support the hardware?
You know, I can't say for certain that there are significant differences. If there are differences, I would say they're very minor and they're based upon the hardware. As you can imagine, Chromebooks, the hardware that's being used with them is pretty low end, which is how they can provide the devices at the cost that they're able to do that. So they're really, I have not really seen much of a difference. So typically, I think if a vendor is working with Google and they say these are the specs that they're working with, I think you're going to find almost every vendor is going to be pretty much identical.
Okay.
Yeah. If there is a difference, I haven't really seen it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So there's been interest in particular, I think, I know at the high school level, so the district has an Office 365 licenses, but currently it's not licensed to students. And I think it's one of those gradient curves, and my seventh graders really don't, even though I prefer it, but they don't have a real need for Office. But I think as the older they get and closer they get to graduation, in particular those students that would be going to college, Word is, and Excel, the Office is the predominant, in the workplace, and at the college level as well. I don't know. I'm not sure how much Google has gone in or out there. So there's been interest in allowing students to license that. And this is the first time we've had this conversation. I don't know if Lucas has had a chance to what that cost would be, if there were, what that would look like. So but there is an interest, particularly I think for the juniors, seniors at the high school level to have access to that software.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Tom. So the statement is correct. As part of our Microsoft licensing, we do have 25,000 licenses for Office 365. There's no additional cost specifically for that. It is Microsoft's licensing method for education essentially builds that into the licensing. And so for those who are not familiar with Office 365, I'll just give a real quick summary of it. So if you think about Google, I'm going to give you that correlation and then give you kind of the picture of what Office 365 is. Google obviously has a suite of software that we provide to our students to use and for our staff. So you got Google Docs, Google Sheets, Google Slides, and other applications. Office 365 has a similar set of tools that, they have a web-based version that's available. And then of course there's a desktop version. And so for all of our new Windows machines that are out there, we're deploying Office 365, the desktop edition, again, which is part of our licensing that we pay every year. So if we were to adopt Office 365 for our students, essentially what it would be doing is doubling the amount of work that my systems team has. So if you think about the Google Workspace for Education suite, there's actually a lot of management involved in that, quite a significant amount of management behind the scenes, rules that we set, a lot of configuration. And so if we were to adopt Office 365, we would essentially be doubling the amount of work for the systems team. And as I mentioned, that's only 2 people in our district, which if in a comparable district, there's 5 to 8 system staff. So that's part of the reason, to be honest with you, why we haven't adopted it. I would frankly love to adopt it. I think it's just one more tool. And I will just tell you, you kind of mentioned, Tom, you didn't necessarily know what universities were doing, but universities offer both. So where my son's going to school, he typically uses Google, but he also knows how to use Microsoft Office just because he's used it on his home computer forever. So if students want to use Office 365 at the university, they can. If they want to use Google, they can. So I think that's what you're seeing at most universities. Both are being made available to the students and they can choose which one they want. For us, we're just where we're at because we just haven't had the bandwidth to do it.
Go ahead, Juan.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much, CTO, for your update there. So just a quick comment or question there. So any possibility you can see to start using some kind of a student volunteer to help you with your IT work? Because yeah, I am a parent of a high school student. Yeah, a lot of kids who are really find a good way to really tap into their talent, and we're willing to provide them good and will be willing to help the district out. Just a quick comment here.
Sure. The one thing I'll say about a system like Office 365 or the Google admin tool is those tools actually give you access to very confidential information. And it's, well, you can imagine the difficulty of having students administering that. You know, to your point about having students assist, I think there are opportunities where we could have students do some work, particularly on end user devices. But I would say that's a future opportunity for sure.
Yeah, or just one last comment. Even some parent volunteer, we're pretty technical. We're working in the industry. We know what's going on. So please put this into your consideration. That's one of the reasons we volunteer in the first place.
I wanted to add in, I really appreciate volunteers. I think there is definitely a place for them. There are some legal and liability limitations to where we can have volunteers. And I think some of these tech positions where there is sensitive information, like Mr. Bogle mentioned, it's just not a place where we can have volunteers. So I think we can look at where that's possible and you know, expand those opportunities, but there are limitations that we have to abide by given the parameters that we have to operate in.
Lucas, if I could ask, is part of our licensing Microsoft Teams and iCloud, is that all in that licensing? Or OneDrive, I'm sorry, OneDrive?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So for staff who are currently using the desktop version of Microsoft Office 365, you do get, I think it's a couple terabytes of storage on OneDrive if you're signed in and logged into that account, which you know, to use it fully, you have to.
Okay, thank you. Vivek?
Yes, I was going to add what President Jones mentioned is that there are liabilities, but the value proposition, we should look at the value proposition of doing this and the cost. So volunteers are great, but maybe from our IT perspective, if there are other things that can be traded off, right, like Chromebook support and things like that, that we can hand off to volunteers, can we support it with the staffing that we have? So perhaps something to look at.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on Office 365?
Question on.
The question I would have, going back to it, Lucas, is at this point, it's really a manpower issue in your department versus any logistics, or I shouldn't say that is logistics, any financial consideration aside from hiring bodies, obviously. Okay, good. Any other questions on the Office 365?
I just had a quick question just in terms of how things integrate together. I mean, I know that generally speaking, across the district, I would think it would be an accurate statement to say that the use of Google Classroom is a growing trend. There's a lot of comfort with Google Classroom. With Office 365, is there any integration? I mean, would we run into any issues where staff was posting assignments and using one system, and students wouldn't be able to then submit with another?
Well, Office really is not a posting system. It's basically, I mean, it's mainly Word and Excel. And I have friends in the business world, and I'm sure some of the people that do. Microsoft Teams is really growing a lot in the business world. It's structured, but I wouldn't think that.
I think that gets to my question of like the collaborative features that are built within the Google apps. Do you lose some of that if some team members are using X versus others that are using Y?
Allison probably knows better than I, but I think the main reason that people are students are interested in the Office is the formatting abilities of Word compared to Google, and then if you are looking at some advanced data, spreadsheets, Excel is much more vibrant and robust than. I think those would be the two areas, not necessarily Microsoft Teams or OneDrive. That was just me personally asking. I shouldn't have put that in the context of adoption there. Allison, is that accurate on that?
Yeah, I would second all that, and I would add sort of to what you guys have been discussing, that a lot of people, the widespread adoption of Google that we're seeing is partly because of the collaborative and cloud features, so that if students are working on a document, that they can work on it together and that it'll be auto-saved and accessible from anywhere. And with Office 365, we would have that. So there are some people having people doing things on slides or sheets, for example, instead of Excel or PowerPoint, when they would not maybe choose to do that because we don't have the cloud and collaborative features that we would have if we were using 365. So that's just part of where this ask is coming from some people, is that, for example, I do a lot of data work with spreadsheets. I think Excel is a better product still, but I want my students to be able to collaborate and save it in the cloud. We already have this, we should be able to do this, that kind of thing. But I hear what Lucas is saying as well, and it makes me wonder from a district level. I run into things all the time where it's like, oh, we could progress on this, but we need to ask the systems team, and there's only two of them, and it's this sort of bottleneck that takes a long time, and that's not their fault. It's because there's two of them and so many demands. And so I wonder, from an advocacy perspective, if there's lots of tech needs that we have, but getting someone else on the systems team is increasingly seems like a priority, and it makes me want to ask what we could do to advocate for that.
Lucas, you're on next in the queue.
Yeah, I did want to make one comment that we do have Office available for our students. It's just that the Office 365 is not necessarily enabled for our students. So at our schools, if they're in a lab and they want to use Office, it is there. But there is, without Office 365, we're not going to have the collaboration capabilities, which is really what we want our students to be learning.
Right. It's an interesting dynamic, because if you're familiar with Office, it has many of the capabilities of collaboration using OneDrive. It's just that Google was a lot quicker and smarter getting it to market, and it's much easier to work. Once you start using OneDrive with other people, it's very similar, and if not exactly, it's just not as intuitive. But regardless, I think that's it. Anne?
Thank you, Tom. From the classified clerical office and technical employee perspective, having that Office capability is great. One of the features that many of your office and technical people use on a regular basis is mail merging. I personally use it just about every day. And that is a great feature to improve productivity. So the employees appreciate, the office and technical appreciate having it. I can see how, as we're growing students to be college and career ready, how important it would be at that secondary level for the kids to be able to use both. But again, those systems people are classified office and technical employees, and as Allison pointed out, they're stretched now. So priorities.
Manjeet?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on the collaborative features of Office 365. It allows you to work on a single document or a single spreadsheet, multiple people at the same time. So that I know it works. I've been using it extensively, and you could have a file on OneDrive and share it with the students. So all those features are available. So it is going to be more of an inertia between using one system to moving to another system, which you are more familiar with. So that will be a learning curve, and if that helps us out, that we have to walk that way then. But feature-wise, you can do all the collaborative things within a document. I could be in one page of Excel or one page of Word, and on the next page, somebody else could be working on it within a single document.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's true for Excel, Word, PowerPoint. I've done that extensively.
Yeah, I think like the funny thing, like I moved from PayPal to company called Greenlight, and it is completely a Google shop from what used to be a completely Microsoft shop. And it's amazing how I found the whole Google Cloud aspect to be so refreshing in terms of collaborative capabilities and all that. So I think it just goes both ways in terms of because all these companies are on it in terms of how do you enable collaboration, all that stuff. And I don't think it just comes down to probably some of these other aspects that probably need to weigh in, and probably economics and things like that. But I think all these companies are on a race to provide the best possible collaborative tools out there. So,
Lucas?
Yeah, I think my final comment really is when we think about our juniors and seniors, I think back when I was that age, we didn't use as much technology. And so I think changing from one product to another was a lot more work. What I will tell you is throughout my son's high school career, he pretty much used Google exclusively. Once in a while, he would use Office 365 or whatever the predecessor to that was, because a particular student or group of students that he was doing a project with used it. But to switch to that, because I think these students, and this is Gen Z, this is the digital generation, right? The transition to using a product really isn't a different product, really is not that difficult. So I think sometimes we think about our mindset, and I don't disagree that having our juniors and seniors using Office 365 would be valuable. But when I talk to my son or kids that he knows at university, to them, it's not as big a deal. They're like, oh, there's this other product. And as was mentioned here, there's a lot of similar design in how you share files, how you collaborate. It's not much of a leap for students. Once they've learned one, it's not much of a leap at all for them to translate that knowledge to another system. And I think I'm actually reading a book right now by some researchers talking about really what does Gen Z look like, and their ability to adapt is very different than what we think of when we were younger. I tell people that we had one computer lab at my high school, and the only time I ever used it was to write my college application. And I had to have someone show me how to do it. So my introduction to using computers really was in college, and that was the 90s. So maybe my small district was a little behind the curve, but I think that's important for us to remember too. Like, we do want to have these tools available to our students, but I think the reality is, even if we can't muster the resources to really do a deployment of Office 365, I think our kids are still going to be okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Samir, you had a
yeah, I just wanted to chime in there and completely agree. I mean, these kids are so savvy when it comes to adapting technologies and what that that looks like. And, you know, if there is any, I guess, sampling, I don't know how many kids have a Outlook account versus a Gmail account, like just out there. And I think Microsoft is probably a bit of a acquired taste, and maybe Google just comes more naturally given how much kids use Google or Google products. And, you know, that's something to think about as well.
Okay. Yeah, no, I you know, Lucas, I think that's a good point. I forget too, because you know, the students are very fluid in terms of technology, you know, and their learning curves. So okay, Robert brought this to the table, the new member recruitment, some language he put there below.
I actually put the language there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But Robert usually leads the new member.
Oh, okay. Robert?
So what do we want to talk about? How we recruit new members? Actually, there's one minor thing that we have 17 members now instead of total 16. But we can look at that later. I guess I tend to spend the most time recruiting new members, but I do welcome everyone to, I mean, this is a public forum, so everyone's welcome to recruit your friends and colleagues. We've had principals recruit staff in the past, but just to give you, until about 2 years ago, it was a lot easier to recruit parents, but then this thing called Yahoo groups went away. You know, half our schools had Yahoo groups up until about 2 years ago. So I could reach several thousand parents and try and get a few volunteers. It's a little bit harder now. So I am actually kind of rethinking this a little bit. There are some Google groups available, and I will be searching for more. But last year I reached out to Zach Larson, who was the director of secondary education. He used to be a principal at Mission. But I was talking to him about something else, and he offered actually to help reach out. So that helped a little bit too. I especially needed help reaching out to Washington and Irvington. They didn't have Yahoo. Washington had a small Yahoo group. Irvington didn't have any, and now it's even worse. So I do have a staff person at Kennedy who has been helpful to reach out to Kennedy parents. American now has a Google group. Mission still has a Google group. But that's generally how I reach out to community members. We don't need too many. Generally, we only need about 4 a year. So we don't have to have extensive efforts, but you know, I do encourage everyone to reach out. And I think also, if anyone has any suggestions on how to reach out, this would be a good time to discuss that.
I think I want to chime in here a little bit. For those of you who don't know, Robert was one of the founding members of TAC. I don't know, that had to be over 20 years ago, right, Robert?
Yeah, it's been a while. I don't think it's been.
Because I've been on TAC now for 17 years, and you were here before me.
Okay. So the memory goes at some point.
So he's had quite a bit of breadth of experience, and always appreciate his that experience as we've grown. So yeah, I think it's important that we. I will speak on a. Well, I guess maybe it's not. I think it's important that we get a breadth of representation from across the district, inclusive of all of our demographics. How do we reach those other groups that may not understand what we do here at TAC and the importance? I think more and more people are understanding how technology is changing the education, in particular the last 5 years. You know, as I said, my 18th year, hard to believe, but when I came in, not every teacher at Hopkins even had a computer. I mean, it was when I got my first desktop, I thought it was a pretty exciting thing. But now it'd be difficult to teach in an environment where computers or Chromebooks were not readily available. So I think it's important we reach out to people to understand those needs of all the groups in Fremont. Any other comments? Juan?
Yes, I just want to make a very quick comment. I'm one of those parents who's recruited by Robert 1.5 years ago. So thank you, Robert, for reaching out through, I think that's at that time Yahoo group. I have to comment that Yahoo or any other kind of group, those technologies getting a little bit outdated. Nowadays, a lot of my friends or my kids, while they're hopping on social network or the different kind of social network, all the way from Facebook to some really address-based social network. So there's certainly a lot more opportunity to reach out, even do a targeted reach out. So Robert, if you are thinking about a different way, certainly I love to brainstorm with you on how to reach out to those districts that are really underrepresented.
Yeah. The only issue for me is that, it'd be great if I can post it, but I don't want to join, 30 different social networking groups just to post these announcements. I picked the Yahoo groups because they're generally associated with PTAs. The membership was generally pretty close to school line. But yeah, maybe there are ways. I know Mission has a whole bunch of groups now. They've splintered in, and I don't really want to join too many groups for that. But yeah, maybe we can find some other ways to do this. Any other suggestions?
If anybody has any suggestions, feel free to reach out to
Mark. Just wanted to double check that the committee is okay having an online application. It's a Google form now. Most of the committees are going to be built to have a single Google form and then answer the subsections of the committee, like ours about networking experience and things like that. So just wanted to make sure we were comfortable with that.
Did you want an official motion and vote?
It is on the agenda, that the example, but I don't know if people have had time to look at it. So maybe we want to vote on it next meeting.
Okay.
You guys can review it. It accepts results, but it hasn't been published other than to our group.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that then. We'll put it on the next agenda. CTO update. Lucas.
All right. Hey, I just wanted to make a couple quick comments about the new member piece, reminding people that the term for our current members that will be expiring this year is May 31st. And so typically, the May board meeting is when we should have the board selecting new members and the superintendent appointing new members, just for reference. And for our student, the student would be selected over the summer, and then they would join us next fall. And I think the board members, you guys just made your decision, which is why we have Trustee Jones here tonight. So in the past, things were a little bit more simple, but now we've got these different phases of when people join. And I believe this year, I think we have 5 staff members who their term is ending, and I think 4 parents. So every year we have change.
Right. So I think we should discuss next whether people are going to be signing up again at the next meeting.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. Okay. Let's see, for the CTO update tonight, I want to acknowledge and thank our group for the work that we did on reviewing the student Gmail rules at our previous meeting, and wanted to give you a quick update as to where that stands. And for those who were not part of that, and for Trustee Jones as well, who is here tonight, just to give you some quick information. So when we implemented Gmail accounts for students, the Technology Advisory Committee spent a significant amount of time walking through what the restrictions and the rules would be for those student accounts, all the way from the elementary, middle, junior high, and high school level. So there was a lot of work done, and we made some decisions to be fairly restrictive on our initial deployment. And those are really just administrative rules internally that we follow These are not tied to a board policy specifically or an administrative regulation, because these types of things do require some flexibility. So we learned through experience, from feedback from teachers and administrators, district office staff, that the restrictions that we put in place were, they created some challenges for working with our students. And I think I've mentioned this before, but one of the tenets that we talk about when we take our Keenan training is that we shouldn't be communicating with our students using personal accounts. That's pretty solid advice for all of us. And so that was one of the reasons, why we wanted to have student Gmail accounts that were through the district rather than using students' personal accounts. But because of how restrictive we made the rules, it's created a circumstance where we are occasionally having to communicate with students using their personal accounts. One example actually is our student TAC member, who he dropped off, it looks like, at some point, but he's not able to join us with his school account. He has to use his district or his personal account, because I don't have access to email him as a student as part of our restrictions. Same with district office. So there are times where certain district office staff has to communicate with students at the high school level. They can't do that with the current restrictions we have in place, and vice versa. And so after reviewing the way different districts have been doing it, we proposed the change to be that any student or staff member in the district can communicate with each other. There are plenty of other districts out there that are doing that. I did bring it to so this last month I brought this to Cabinet for their opportunity to review it, and they had very positive feedback, and they asked me to put together a board update. So you guys will be seeing a Friday board update from me in that. Once we've communicated that to the board, then I anticipate that we'll be moving forward with that adjustment. And I think probably by April 1st, we will have that change in place, if not sooner. So I appreciate everybody's patience, but I also appreciate all your efforts in putting together those revised guidelines and the feedback. Sometimes change is slow, but I think because we have good feedback, hopefully we're going to get it even better this time. So that's really where we stand with the Gmail update. I think that was the only update I had tonight. Tom, am I forgetting an update that I was supposed to give? I know we talked real briefly. Hope you're on mute there.
Yeah, the only other thing, we talked about, we moved the LMS up. So yeah, that was it.
Okay.
Oh, I know what I was going to ask you, and I apologize I didn't. If you wanted to give a 2-minute update on the status of construction, if there's anything that has changed there.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of updates right now on the middle school conversion projects, but I can tell you the RICS project is moving along pretty quickly now. I was out on site again today. Looks like our final, this is really getting into the weeds here, but I'll share it with you anyways. The final fiber testing is happening. So the connectivity between the district office and the RICS site. I worked with the technician on site there and at the district office, and then also our dark fiber to American High School as well is being finally tested. So I think that's going to be completed this week. Once the MDF has power to it, we'll get our Juniper switch installed, and then we'll actually have them connected to the wide area network. But the air conditioning unit is also not turned on in there yet. So there's some logistical things that have to be done, but the technology infrastructure is looking pretty good. The wiring, it looks like, is going to be done this week. If not this week, probably by next week, based on the site walk I did today. And then I know the flooring is going in. And once that flooring is completed and all the dust is settled, then we're going to be out there. We're going to be putting in 75-inch TVs. We're waiting for the plywood to be installed. That's going to be our team that's going to do that. And the clock bell speakers are being installed as we speak. So that's moving along pretty fast.
Excellent. Thank you. Excellent. Okay. Well, we have a few minutes. Um, I apologize. I know that we were supposed to be getting together on agenda. So until that's resolved in terms of a recommendation of the board, I mean the board, the committee, the way that Lucas and I have been, we've just been taking emails from any of the members and we've just been slotting them in. So until we have a final resolution on that, I'd appreciate if just you email myself, and then I'll make sure that we get on the agenda as we go through here. Before that, if we could go back up to two things. If everybody's had a chance to look at the agenda from the 10th, anybody like to make a motion to accept?
I move to accept the minutes from last month.
Makes a motion, looking for a second. I guess I'll second. And Allison seconded. If you could type your yes in the chat, all in favor. Remembering, if you were not here, you cannot vote. Any opposed? And any abstentions if you were not here at the last meeting? Nope. Okay. Good.
Linda wasn't here.
Linda and Michelle.
And
okay. Any final thoughts, or Lucas?
Yeah, Allison, you had brought up a point at the beginning about hotspots for our immigrant students. I will mention that we did get funding approval for emergency connectivity funding for some of these hotspots. The process has been very slow. I do believe as of last week, I now have coordinated with AT&T for us to get our discounted billing. It has taken a gargantuan effort to get to this point. They have now told me within 1 to 2 months, I will start getting discounted billing. Now, knowing that that's in place, obviously we have not a lot of time left this year. And, you know, the reality is the federal government did not give us much time for this. I know there are districts that didn't even get approved, I think, until January, and then they still have to go through their whole process of getting these things in place. Depending on the number of students, I think we can probably get something in place pretty quickly for them. But I just need to know what those numbers are. We are really trying to ramp up the number of hotspots that we can make available for students that don't have access at home. This has been one of these high stress things for me because I want to take advantage of this, but I can't make the government move very quickly. Unfortunately, it's been an uphill battle with them.
Bart, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that as a reminder, the TAC committee is a Brown Act committee, and we are currently meeting virtually because of a state law that's passed, 361. There's a good chance that that will change sooner than it's inspected. I think right now it expires at the beginning of 2024. So if we are interested in staying a virtual committee, we would actually have to change our bylaws and potentially even dissolve this committee and start a new committee that was not a Brown Act committee. So just as a heads up, it may be that we are meeting back in person within a few months potentially. And that was happening previously to the pandemic for years, but I just wanted to alert the committee if we felt like we really wanted to stay virtual, we would have to change our form.
I haven't thought much of, you know, kind of off the. I would think, and unless the committee somebody vehemently objected to this, I personally would follow the direction of the board on this. I wouldn't think. I mean, though we are technology, and this is, for lack of the pinnacle of technology, meeting virtually, et cetera, et cetera. I would think that we would look to the board for guidance on how they would Oh, and Diane has raised her hands.
Yeah, I think, the challenge would be is any committee where the board appoints members to the committee, or if the board has taken action to create a committee or the committee advises the board, it's a Brown Act committee. And I think it's, the challenge would be is that we want this committee advising the board. We very likely want the board to still be able to appoint members to this committee. So I think it's unlikely that this would not be a Brown Act committee. And partly that's because of its importance to the district. But yeah, it is a challenge as we've, and it's some advocacy that I can take to our legislators, because I think what we've seen throughout the district, and I'm hearing in other districts, is that committee meetings have actually been more robust when they're virtual. It makes it easier for people to join and participate, and they tend to be accessible to people who wouldn't otherwise be able to attend or tune in. And there's value in that. But currently, if the emergency order expires, we would go back to in-person meetings. And I think there's an opportunity to let our legislators know that they're actually more accessible this way than they are in person in many cases. So that's something that I can work on when I'm meeting with legislators, is to ask for the ability for us to continue to meet virtually outside of the emergency order.
Well, though that's not an official board vote, I would say that's our guidance there currently. Unofficial, official guidance that we're getting. With that, is there anything else? Anybody have any final questions, comments? I don't know if we should always add that into the agenda or not. Final questions or comments? No? Okay, I get a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Yep.
Allison, second. Linda? So adjourned. Everybody have a great evening, and I will see everybody next month.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Take care, sir.
Thank you, Alec.